Hello, I'm Mandi McLeod. Welcome to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. Coming up in the show, who should decide what you like to eat? And why has a Wisconsin judge declared that people have no fundamental right to consume foods of their choice? What will be the impact on Kiwi farm family business succession with the repeal of gift duty now taking effect? And what can New Zealand farmers learn from the Horn of Africa, a region devastated by drought, war and rising food prices? Joining me today is Greg Glover, the chair of Waikato Balance Farm Awards, and Westpac senior economist Anne Boniface. Welcome. Wisconsin has the toughest laws on unpasteurised milk, which it believes is essential for the protection of consumers and the economic well-being of the dairy industry there. In an attempt to get around this, some consumers, they're pretty cunning, have been buying shares in a cow to access the fresh milk. However, a judge in Wisconsin has put paid to this with the unequivocal message that Wisconsin residents have no right to consume foods of their own choice in their own homes. Greg, how draconian is this? In New Zealand, we've got no such regulations beyond Fonterra's, 5 litres per person rule. Could this damage our reputation that milk is safe? What do you think?
I don't think it has any relevance at all to New Zealand. Pasteurisation is put there for protecting the consumers from various organisms that used to be in the milk. It sounds more like protectionism for the actual processing factories in Wisconsin and trying to protect their business actually. Given
that most other countries there is provision for the sale of unpasteurised milk in some degree, especially like France, it's all their cheeses, etc. And do you think this kind of sends a message that potentially Wisconsin milk isn't as clean as other parts of the country? Wouldn't it potentially damage their reputation?
Not necessarily, I don't think. I think they're trying to keep some consistency with their products, so when consumers are buying Wisconsin milk, they know exactly what they're buying, so it will be pasteurised in their case. So it's difficult to tell the difference between one glass of milk from another sometimes before you drink it, clearly. So it can provide some background to the branding that they're trying to achieve, I guess.
See, the thing that I find this, is really interesting is that it tends to contradict a study published in the Journal of Allergy and Clinical Immunology, which found that children who drank only raw milk had a 41% reduction in the odds of developing asthma. Now, don't you find that quite interesting that that's an American study published in a legitimate journal, and Wisconsin are still sticking to their stance? Do you think we're going to start to see a black market of raw milk with people going to great lengths to hide the fact that their children are consuming it? Or is this just a bit ridiculous and we move on?
I think it's ridiculous.
I've never been to Wisconsin, so I don't know what the black market in raw milk's like there. So.
Well, I'm going in a couple of weeks, so I'm going to try and smuggle some and see what I can do. Yeah, give it a go. So, but you end up in jail, you guys come and bail me out. Okay, this week the gift duty tax has been abolished, a move heralded to make family business succession easier. It was a move that was really pushed hard by Federated Farmers of New Zealand. And do you think this is going to be a case that we'll be able to see more family farm business succession happen? Because previously they were only allowed to transfer $27,000 without the tax, crippling the abilities, the family business to succeed. Are we going to see more of it?
Potentially, but to me it doesn't sound like that particular tax has been much of an impediment to family farm succession or other types of gifts. There seem to be plenty of ways around it, given that the tax was only bringing in $1 million a year or somewhere in that realm for the government anyway. So people have been getting on with life in other ways around that tax.
What it will do is reduce the cost of avoiding that.
Yeah.
And so rather than having family trusts and setting up companies and complicated structures to try and avoid that tax, they will be able to concentrate on what the real issue is, which is actually setting up a succession plan that is workable.
Do you think then that's going to be a loss of a market for a large number of people who've made their money out of complicating structures to get around the gift duty?
I don't particularly care about that. If it simplifies the system and New Zealand producers and New Zealand company owners can get on with the business that they're in, rather than worrying about all this structural stuff that actually produces nothing, I think New Zealand will be in a much stronger position without it.
So I guess all of the reasons that they've talked about is that this law change being really important are actually what we're seeing now is potentially a bit spurious and not actually going to make any real changes on the ground. Yeah?
I think it'll just allow people to concentrate on what's really important and bringing the children up to speed so that they can understand the business that they're potentially going to take over and become more aware of what's happening. I think it's going to be positive.
And simplification of the tax system in general is always a good move.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Okay, so the Horn of Africa has been in the news for months now as starving Africans struggle against drought, militia and the cost of food. A UN report believes that the underlying reason for this region's vulnerability is an underinvestment in agriculture and inadequate management of resources. Do the same issues, underinvestment and inadequate management, exist in New Zealand?
I think we've got perhaps... I just find it very difficult to compare what's going on in the Horn of Africa to what's going on in New Zealand, because clearly there are enormous issues around civil war and conflict, which bring the priority of investment in infrastructure and agriculture down. Though when it becomes famine in the countries, then suddenly people want to think about why they hadn't done that previously. In New Zealand's case, we're clearly a much more dependent agriculture-based economy, so it gets a much higher priority in our thinking, I guess.
We are also only 4 million people. We can more than feed ourselves. And we're an export nation of our agricultural products, and we do have a very good infrastructure around agriculture. Possibly we need a better, more emphasis on other parts of the economy than just agriculture. Otherwise we're in the risk of having one strong leg to our stool and the other parts of the economy not doing so well.
Do you think that potentially, and one of the things that when I read the report and I looked at it was, yeah, we can feed ourselves, but New Zealand's got a responsibility to feed other people as well. Do you think that we're managing our resources well enough to produce more food? Can we increase the production of what we've got? And I say this in light of the Māori report, which highlighted that 80% of Māori agricultural land was being undermanaged, underutilised. And I'm sure that the case is also true in non-Māori land. So is there a danger that we are not keeping up our end of the bargain to help feed countries, like those in the Horn of Africa, by not utilising our resources well enough, water, land, all of those things?
I think there's a bit of a myth around the Maori land. There is a definite movement to improve their productivity, and they're really starting to take ownership of it and pride in what they're doing. And there's some actually very large businesses coming out of that resource, and I think that's a really good thing. So it might have taken a little while to get there, but the momentum is definitely there now. And
it's about building up the skills and the resources within that sector and the knowledge base to try and continue that momentum on. As you say, it's getting there, building the structures to help it get further.
And I guess, for me, when I look at what's happening in the Horn of Africa, maybe that's some of the skills that we should be passing on to them of how to actually grow crops in drought-stricken areas, so at least they can feed themselves rather than maybe having an actual agricultural industry per se, because it's pretty hard to do that when you're worried about getting shot in the head by some militia. Okay, coming up after the break, Grass to Glass Guardians, the complete supply chain management for milk, is the first of its kind in New Zealand. Why have so many industry players joined forces to make this happen? How can New Zealand agriculture insulate itself against rising costs in uncertain currency markets? Pipe dream or possibility? And we delve into Westpac's final quarter report and drill down to deliver must-know information for all good keen farmers. All this when we return. Welcome back to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. Guardians is the brainchild of Greenfield's agricultural research, dairy innovation and nutritional systems. And it's all about keeping the value and product integrity in New Zealand. In Straight Furrow recently, Guardians spokesperson Rochelle Sutton said, Guardians encapsulates the essence of brand New Zealand, recognising that the world is becoming a more discerning place where both brands and consumers are demanding traceability of their end products, especially in ranges as sensitive as infant formula and early developmental nutritional products. Greg, do we really need such an approach, this grass to glass?
There's nothing new in what they're saying.
Yeah.
Standards are continually increasing. There's consumer trust in the products that we're eating, and I guess it might go back to that Wisconsin story a little bit. The people just want to have trust in it, and so the standards are going to continually improve, and we needing to position out. New Zealand only produces enough food to feed, sort of 30 million people or 40 million people in the world. So we are a niche operator. So we do need to. That's how we need to promote ourselves, I guess. But yeah, there's nothing new in that statement.
And I guess if there is a market for that type of product and people are willing to pay more for it, then why not jump in and kind of meet that need?
Do you think it's people taking advantage of the Sanlu issue where there was concern around infant formula and they're trying to come up with a way of capitalising on what happened there? I think one of the things that I believe is that safety is probably the most important ingredient in our food. Is this something that they're capitalising on and other dairy companies aren't?
I really don't think so. Look, New Zealand has some of the highest standards in the world, and we're up for criticism from the 140 countries that we export to. So we actually have to be squeaky clean all the time. And the Assure Quality is the organisation, the government organisation that sort of sets the standards and polices them. Yeah, I don't know that we need anything else.
There's a massive investment going into this in Balclutha. So it's interesting to see that there's obviously someone's done a research and a project to be quite happy to put the millions of dollars required to have this innovation in dairy packaging.
Which suggests there's some return on that investment available as well, which suggests people are willing to pay a higher premium for those types of products.
Yeah, I guess, my first thought was why isn't one of our own dairy companies looking at going into that niche market, but maybe it's not big enough for them, I don't know.
I mean, whenever dairy companies brand their products, they're essentially trading on that brand as well, right? So they're providing some statement about what is in that brand and the quality of that product, they stand behind it.
I think you'll find Fonterra's already in that space and actually leveraging it as much as they possibly can. And what this organisation is doing is trying to compete with an existing exporting company and trying to create their own brand. Yeah.
Well, we shall watch with interest, shan't we? Anne, with Greece's financial future becoming more and more uncertain, how can New Zealand agriculture insulate itself against, I guess, what many would say is the return or the revigoration of the recession?
I guess there's no easy answers. The good thing for New Zealand agriculture and for the New Zealand economy in general is the floating exchange rate. So when commodity prices are relatively high and the New Zealand economy is going well, then the exchange rate tends to be quite high as well. If commodity prices fall, then the exchange rate falls as well, which provides some buffer for kind of farm gate returns there. So that's the biggest thing working in our favour, and Greece doesn't have that. So one of the reasons Greece is in so much trouble is that it's in the euro and that combined currency. Its currency can't depreciate in the way that a floating currency could.
Okay, so do you think that if we look at Greece defaulting, what are the flow-ons from that, and how is that going to impact New Zealand in the medium term, if you like?
So for the agriculture sector in particular, I guess there's two key channels through which that may impact. The first, as I mentioned, is softer commodity prices, not only because of slowing growth in Western economies, but because more of the product there will be heading to market, so increasing supply in some of the key areas such as dairy. So that's one effect. The other effect is what's going on in interest rate markets. So all the uncertainty and volatility in offshore markets is actually potentially going to increase the cost of offshore funds for New Zealand banks. In turn, they'll pass those costs on to retail consumers eventually if that volatility and those credit markets remain in the kind of state that they're in at the moment. So that's kind of perhaps a next year story, but something to be wary of as rising interest rates.
Okay, so that's definitely a take-home message for farmers to look at.
The volatility is just incredible. 10 years ago, 1 cent movement in the New Zealand dollar was, we used to worry about it because
it was a Herald headline, wasn't it?
Yeah, it would be 10 cents on a kilogram milk solids easily. Now, a month ago, it's moved 10 cents in the last month.
Yeah.
Easily 10 cents, Just incredible.
And maybe we're getting more attuned to that, and hopefully it'll help us run our businesses better as we understand the currency a bit more and all of that. One of the things that Dr. Pierce Lyons said, who's the founder of Alltech, would say that breaking the productivity barrier is all about breaking the mental barrier. Can we in New Zealand do that in the economic environment that we're in?
I think there's always an incentive to kind of moved forward with productivity. When times are tight and profit margins are pretty slim, there's a bigger incentive there perhaps, but that's certainly something the industry in general should be working on when times are good as well, not just when times are difficult.
I actually look at it this way: the cost of labour in New Zealand is actually really high compared to Mexico or South American countries or all those places, and so productivity is actually always on the top of our. I'm talking as a farmer regarding this. Productivity is at the top of our list, because if we can get by with less people or have technology do more of the work, or actually lift our productivity with our production with less input, then that's what we try and do. So I think New Zealand agriculture is actually really focused on productivity.
And that leads me into the next part of the show, which is what are you and Westpac seeing in the final quarter for New Zealand?
So the things that we're talking about are really is all eyes on Europe at the moment. So what's going on in Greece and other countries in Europe is likely to have potentially a big impact on New Zealand. We think commodity prices will soften on the back of that, not only because of what's going on in Western economies, but also because of policy tightening going on in China and other emerging market economies in Asia. So we're not forecasting a fall off a cliff or anything, but we think commodity prices will moderate over the next 6 months or so.
Now, that's interesting, because yesterday I caught part of Julia Gillard's speech around tax, and she was pretty much saying that the Australian economy was going to be relying on Asia, and the whole sector, the Australian sector and that economy was again reliant on Asia. Are we in the same boat in New Zealand, that we're reliant on selling our products into Asia versus Europe, and we've got the potential to discount what happens in Europe?
Increasingly so, not entirely, because what happens in Europe doesn't happen in isolation. But New Zealand's the first biggest trading partner is Australia, who is reliant on Asia, as you said. Second biggest trading partner is now China. So countries in the Western world, in Europe and the US, have slipped down that trading partner list. That doesn't mean that they're not important, but it does mean less of our product is heading there directly. So what's going on there is important, but not as important as it would have been 20 or 30 years ago.
Do you think that, if we go back to Greg's analogy of the stool, do you think that our Asian leg of the stool is becoming too heavy, that we're putting too much reliance on Asia? And what's the chance of, say, China ending up in a similar position?
China has a different set of risks around it to what Western Europe does at the moment. So they've got very high savings rates and not a lot of government debt versus Western economies, which have a lot of government debt at the moment. So it creates a different set of risks, I guess. As producers and as sellers of commodities, we want to sell where the highest prices, and that's exactly what Australia is doing, and that's what we're doing. Those that are willing to pay the most for the stuff that we're producing, we're sending it to them.
So I guess the key thing coming out of your report for farmers on the ground is to make sure that they've got their business strategies well and truly sorted, and that they're producing their products as efficiently as they can and continually improving those processes.
I think that's always a good message.
Well, it's glad to see it's one that you guys have put out there. Okay, after the break, we're going to ask Greg and Anne what's got them fired up. Is it going to be a rant or will it be a rave? You join us after the break and find out. Welcome back to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. It's time now for our weekly rant and rave. Greg.
Well, I've got a bit of a rave, I think. I'm enormously proud of how New Zealand has taken to the Rugby World Cup. We've got a lot of our trading nations here, and we've welcomed them with open arms. You see it on the news, right from one end of the country to the other. The Russians, the Japanese, the Americans, the whole lot. They've been really absorbed by the local communities, and I'm really proud of that. And the other thing that it's done is the social interaction that has gone on right through the country. Our neighbour, he's got a garden shed that he's turned into a sort of a spectator zone with lots of rugby memorabilia there, 50-inch television screen, glass of red wine, and it's just fantastic watching the rugby. And what a period of 6 or 8 weeks that we're going through. It's just
a glass
fantastic.
of red wine to watch the rugby with. That's kind of a bit anti-culture, isn't it? It's got to be beer, surely.
Oh, after the beer. Yeah.
Honestly, that's a little bit, I don't know, you just suddenly ruined your profile there for a minute. And what about you? What have you got?
I thought I'd have a rave as well about how reasonable the weather has been and how much farmers are taking advantage of it. So Fonterra is struggling to collect all the milk at the moment, and it's 2 weeks or so ahead of peak production. So farmers are doing well.
Do you think there's a flip side to that? And I sort of don't like to be wearing the black hat too much, but are we in danger then of having too much product and going into weakening commodity prices? Is that a bit nerve-wracking for the guys at Fonterra, do you think?
I think they'll be sort of watching and seeing how things go, but certainly increased supply tends to put downward pressure on prices, and that's another reason that not only supply from New Zealand but supply from other economies as well is one reason we think downward pressure on prices over the next 6 months or so.
Well, I mean, I certainly know from a farming perspective, this season has been, it's been challenging for some. You know, we got really short of grass at one point in time, and I know that was pretty extraordinary and extreme for some farmers in some regions. However, I looked out my kitchen window the other day and I looked at my cows. They were right outside my window, and I thought, you know, this is why I do it. My cows were fat. They were not so fat. They were happy. They were really good condition. And I just felt brilliant. And I thought, this is the sun shining on New Zealand at a time when the world is with us and they're going around and looking at the best that we can offer in terms of agriculture and I guess social environment. I think it's fantastic that those countries have been coming to New Zealand as well and participating and putting themselves in to be participating in social communities, in the rural communities. I think that in itself is great. They haven't just stuck in the cities. They've come out to the smaller rural communities. They've got to see a relatively untouristy view of New Zealand, which I think is fantastic. And I guess my wee rave is about Dan Carter. I know it's got nothing to do with agriculture, and it's got nothing to do with the fact that he's got a hot bod at all. I just want to say that it's bad luck that Dan Carter's not going to be in the All Blacks at the end, but there's no I in team, and I think that our boys need to be solidly supporting Dan, but going out there and winning the cup for him as well as the rest of New Zealand. So I say I'm all for that, but I've got to say, Greg, I'm going to tell you this right now, I am picking a Welsh All Blacks final. You heard it from me.
Well, there's a lot of people that wouldn't disagree with that.
And if it does come down to a Welsh All Blacks final, I really have to say I'm not sure whose side I'll be on. Well, I'll be having probably
it's controversial.
It will be controversial. I'll have to have my Welsh flag in one hand and my my All Blacks in the other, and be very excited at the result at the end of the day. Anyway,
I thought McLeod was Scottish.
Oh, McLeod is Scottish, but I lived in Wales for such a long time that, you know, I'm kind of part of the Welsh community, really. And I want to come back to what you were saying about the weather that we've got right now and how fantastic it is, and that farmers are taking advantage of it. And it brings me to mind around leadership. And leadership is about continually interpreting and reinterpreting our environment, which is not just our climatic environment, it's the whole box and dice. And we've been having a pretty sweet run of it, not only in the dairy sector, but with sheep and cattle as well. And the weather right at the moment is on our side. Do you think our leaders are going to continually reinterpret the environment, or are we going to kind of sit back on the hype that we're doing really well at the minute?
I don't think anyone's willing to sort of sit back and see, because everyone has quite long memories and quite often the good times don't last for too long anyway. So I think that would be a dangerous position to take, and I would hope that the leaders in the community aren't in that kind of position. It's a good opportunity to take stock and look forward as to what the next challenges might be.
I think one of the advantages is that it helps lower the cost of production on the farm, and I agree with you that we have long memories. It wasn't that long ago there was a drought in the summer that was probably one of the worst droughts that New Zealand's had for years and years and years. And so farmers are continually thinking about what the rest of the season's going to look like. They've put this one in the bag and happy to have it there, but they'll use it to sort of fortify themselves for the rest of the season as well.
I think it's really awesome that if farmers can actually take the opportunity to celebrate what they do and why they do it, because this is really when it all comes together and you have some fine weather and everything's looking great. I think we need to take some time and just go, this is really brilliant we've had some really hard years, and actually my heart goes out to all the kiwi fruit growers out there with PSA as well, because they're really struggling, and I don't think they're actually getting enough press either. So I'd like to offer my support for you out there as well. Well, that wraps up our latest edition of Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. I'd like to thank my guests Greg Glover and Anne Boniface, and thanks to you too for watching. Remember to check out my blog online at country99tv.co.nz. I love hearing from you. I'll catch you next week, and in the meantime, keep on smiling.